Hi! Today is another productive day because we are going to learn 2 topics in one sitting with the help of Dr. Mendoza. Our topics are acquiring and teaching pronunciation and strategies for communicating and learning. To start, kindly take note of these questions. Done? Language conveys meanings from one person to another through spoken sounds, written letters, or gestures. Speakers know how to pronounce the words, sentences, and utterances of their native language. Talking about the sounds of language necessitates some way of writing down the sounds without a reference to ordinary written language. For over a century, the solution for researchers and teachers in much of the world has been the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA, which supplies symbols for all the sounds that could occur in human languages. The starting point about pronunciation is the obvious fact that it is a physical activity as much as it is a mental one. Speaking means coordinating a number of muscular processes ranging from breathing to rounding your lips. The control of most of this is not conscious. Few of us are aware of our tongue. Position when we say oo or what we have to do to make a stop consonant like. The science that studies these physical aspects of speech is called articulatory phonetics, and we cannot really go into the extremely technical process involved in speech here. In traditional phonological theories of the 20th century, each language uses a certain number of sounds called phonemes that distinguish words and morphemes from one another. The spoken word sin is different from the word tin because one has the consonant phoneme S, the other the phoneme T or the T. As well as phonemes, there are allophones variant pronunciations for a phoneme in different situations, which do not affect the meaning. For instance, in English, the phoneme L has 3 main allophones. At the beginning of a word such as leaf, it is also called clear, sounding more like a front high vowel. At the end of a word such as feel, it can be pronounced as a dark. In the early days of the direct method of language teaching, phonetic scripts were often used directly for language teaching. People would really allow text in IPA, apparently common in China to this day. Phonetic script is still commonly used to advanced level where people are often taught ear training by transcribing spoken language. Over the years, the concept of phoneme has proved useful in organizing materials for teaching pronunciation, even when it has been largely superseded in much phonological research. Pronunciation textbooks like sheep or sheep present the students with pairs of words car versus cow or bra versus bro. This technique originated from the minimal pairs technique used by linguists to establish the phonemes of a language from scratch. You present the native speakers with a series of likely or unlikely pairs of words and ask them whether they are different. In typical pronunciation materials, the student learns how to distinguish one phoneme from another by hearing and repeating sentences with a high concentration of a particular phoneme, such as, I found a mouse in the house, or this is the cleanest house in the town, or traditional tongue twisters such as, he ran from the Indies to the Andes in his undies. Traditionally, much research into the second language acquisition of phonology has focused on the phoneme. A classic example is the work of Wilfred Whedon and William Nemser, who look at phonemes and features in the acquisition of English by Austrian school children. They found that some phonemes improved gradually over time, while others showed no improvement. The learners went through 3 stages: the presystemic, the transfer, the approximative. Presystemic, at this stage, learners learn the sounds in individual words but without any overall pattern. For example, they may learn the in know, but not the in quote. Transfer. Now the learners start to treat the second language sounds systematically as equivalent to the sounds of the first language. For example, they see the second language sounds through the lens of the first. Approximative. Finally, the learners realize their native sounds are not good enough and attempt to restructure the second language sounds in a new system. They realize that the sounds are not just variants of their native sounds. In learning below the phoneme level, let us take the example of voice onset time or VOT, which has been extensively researched in second language acquisition research. One of the differences between pairs of plosive consonants such as t, d, and k, j is the VOT, the interval of time between the consonant and the following vowel. Take a look at this. The same as the English k, j, or g, because English k has VOT that starts at plus 80 milliseconds, but Spanish k has VOT of only plus 29 mils. As Watson sums up, in both production and perception, therefore, studies of children and adults suggest that bilinguals behave in ways that are at once distinct from monolinguals and very similar to them. Second language users are not imitation native speakers but something unique. We should not expect them to be like natives, second language users with multi-competent, not imitation native speakers with monolingual competence. Many theories of phonology see the phoneme as build-up of a number of distinctive features. The English p, b conscious is made up of features such as frontis, lenis. P is a fortis consonant said with extra energy like k, t, while b is a lenis consonant said with less energy like g, d. Voice p is a voiceless consonant in which the vocal cords do not vibrate like t and k, while b is a voice consonant during which the vocal cords vibrate like g and d. Aspiration p is aspirated, for example, has a long VOT, like t, while b is unaspirated like d. It is often the feature that gives trouble, not the individual phoneme. In other words, a whole group of phonemes that share the same feature. The Speech Accent Archive of George Mason University details the typical pronunciations of many accents of English, both native and non-native, as we see in the box. Remember that much learning of pronunciation depends on aspects other than the phoneme, for example, distinctive features. Language of second, learners gradually acquire the second language way of voicing stop consonants. Second language learners, first language is affected by their knowledge of the second language, as well as their second being affected by the first. In terms of learning syllable structure, the clash between the syllable structures of the first and second language is resolved by the expedient of adding vowels or leaving out consonants. A true interlanguage solution, it is not just the phonemes in the sentence that matter, but the abstract syllable structure that governs in their combination. Indeed, some phonologists regard the syllable as the main unit in speaking or listening rather than the phoneme. One reason being that the sheer number of phonemes per second is too many for the brain to process and some other unit must be involved. Have that, a crucial aspect of language acquisition is the mastery of syllable structure. Second, learners often try to make their second language syllable structure fit the structure of their first language by adding or omitting vowels and consonants. Transfer, carrying over elements of one language one knows to another, whether first language to second language or second language to first language, or the reverse transfer, or indeed the third language or the fourth language. Fourth is accent versus dialect. An accent is a way of pronouncing a language that is typical of a particular group, whether regional or social. A dialect is the whole system characteristic of a particular group, including grammar and vocabulary, as well as pronunciation. One of the most significant ways for me to learn pronunciation is the IPA. IPA always enables me to correct the mistakes in pronouncing a word when sometimes even when my teachers pronounce it wrong. Another way is listening to BBC or VOA. Such authorized channels not only correct my pronunciation of a word but also can provide me a correct intonation and conversations. Last but not the least, always be careful to learn pronunciation and intonation when you speak native English speaker. And last of all, practice. In first language and transfer, usually it is very easy to spot the first language of a non-native speaker from their accent. German speakers of English tend to say zing when they mean thing. Japanese pray when they mean play. The reason for these pronunciation problems has been called cross-linguistic transfer. A person who knows two languages transfers some aspect from one language to another. In other words, this is language in a second language sense of linguistic competence. What can be transferred depends, among other things, on the relationship between two languages. According to Fred Ekman, L. Reyes, and Iverson have drawn up three possibilities. The first language has neither of the contrasting second language sounds. The second language has one of the second language sounds. And the third, the second language has both sounds as allophones of the same phoneme. In second language and universal processes of acquisition as well as transfer, second language learners make use of universal processes common to all learners. Some problems are shared by second language learners because of the similar processes of language processing and acquisition engraved into their minds. Look at this picture. Major takes the example of English speakers learning the Spanish trilled. They start with the English sound written phonetically as in the next stages, through the Spanish starts to appear, they also use a ovular trilled based on their universal processes. Spanish or R continues to increase until it reaches 100% while others decrease until they reach 0 in stage 5. Learning pronunciation then depends upon three different components. First language transfer, universal processes, and second language. The relationship between these varies according to the learner's stage. Remember that a crucial element in second language phonology acquisition is transfer from the first language, which depend partly on the nature of the two phonological systems. Nevertheless, phonological acquisition also depends on universal processes of language acquisition available to the human mind. Received pronunciation or RP, which the usual accent of British English given in books about English, spoken by a small minority in England, English as lingua franca, English used as a means of communication among people with different first language rather than between natives. In teaching a native speaker variety, the choice has to be made between national varieties and between different local and class accents. In teaching an international language like ELF, the choice is which forms work best among non-native speakers from different countries. Let us go through some standard techniques for teaching pronunciation in the light of what we have been saying. Use of phonetic script. At advanced levels, students are sometimes helped by looking at phonetic scripts of spoken language using IPA or by making transcripts of speech themselves. As we see throughout this book, it is disputable whether such conscious awareness of pronunciation ever converts into the unconscious ability to speak, useful as it may be as an academic activity for future teachers. Imitation. Imitation, repetition of words or phrases has been the mainstay of pronunciation teaching. For example, ask students to listen and repeat the words and sounds and copy the rhythm. Whatever the means, at one level, this is impromptu repetition at the teacher's command, at another repetition of dialogues in the language laboratory sentence by sentence. Discrimination of sounds. Audiolingual teaching believed that if you can't hear a distinction, you can't make it. This led to minimal pair exercises in which the students have to indicate whether they hear lies or rice or nice in the sentence. Consciousness raising. Rather than concentrating on specific aspects of speech, the students' ears are trained to hear things better. For example, Eric Hawkins used to get students to listen to noises he made by hitting objects. They had to invent a transcription system so that they could play back the noises he had made. Communication. In principal pronunciation, materials could use the actual problems of communication as a basic for teaching. For instance, both natives and non-natives confuse 50, 50, and 50, 15 in a real-world situations of shops, etc., presumably because the final N or N sounds like a nasalized vowel rather than a consonant. In learning and teaching intonation, intonation is the way that the pitch of the voice goes up and down during speech. Many ways of describing it have been tried. The problem is that while people agree that intonation is important, they disagree on its function. Some say that it is used for making grammatical distinctions. He's going with falling intonation is a statement, he's going with a rising intonation is a question. Indeed, rising intonation is perhaps the most frequent way of making questions in French. Remember that a major second language learning problem is moving between the two major ways of using intonation in the world's languages: tone languages where intonation shows difference in lexical meaning, and intonation languages where intonation shows grammar, attitude, and others. Intonation mistakes can be dangerous because it is not obvious to the participants that a mistake has been made. Pronunciation teaching should recognize the diversity of levels of pronunciation in a language, including phonemes, allophones, syllables, and intonation. The learning of pronunciation involves aspects of the learner's first language, universal learning processes, and aspects of the second language. Teaching has mostly made use of conventional techniques of phonetic scripts, imitation, sound discrimination, and communication. Students can also be made more aware of sound features of language. Now, let's talk about strategies for communicating and learning. Most of the time, teachers think they know best. They make the students carry out various activities. They select the language they are going to hear or read, the task they are going to do. They prescribe the language they should produce, all hopefully in their best interest. But as human beings, students have minds of their own. Ultimately, they decide how they are going to tackle the tasks of the classroom and achieve the goals of their learning. Communication strategies as social interaction. One type of a strategy is to paraphrase what you want to say. Typical strategies are approximation. Someone who is groping for a word falls back on a strategy using a word that means approximately the same. Say, animal for horse, because the listener will be able to deduce what is intended from the context. Word coinage. Another form of paraphrase is to make up a word to substitute for the unknown word, air bowl for balloon. Circumlocution. Second language learners talk their way around the word when you make a container for pottery. A second overall type of communication strategy to fall back on the first language known as transfer. Examples are translation from the first language. A German-speaking student says, "Make the door shut," rather than "shut the door," falling back on a German word order. Language switch. That's a nice turtle. Caterpillar. This consists of simply saying the first language word and praying that it is comprehensible in the L2. This is distinct from code switching because the listener does not know the L1. Appeal for assistance. For example, what is this? Mime what you need. My daughter succeeding in getting some candles in a shop in France by singing "Happy Birthday" in English and miming blowing out candles. A third overall type of strategy is avoidance. Do not talk about things you know are difficult to express in the second language, whether whole topics or individual words. In communication strategies as psychological problem solving, we have achievement strategies. These subdivide into cooperative strategies such as appealing to the other person for help, which are mostly similar to Taron's list, and non-cooperative strategies where the learner tries to solve the problems without recourse to others. One form of non-cooperation is to fall back on the first language when in trouble by code switching. The speaker skips language. Do you want to have some Zinsen? The German word for interest. Foreignerization, a Dane literary translating the Danish word for vegetables into English as green things. Another overall grouping is interlanguage strategies based on the learner's evolving L2 system rather than on the L1. Among these, Fair and Crasper include substitution. Speakers substitute one word for another, say, if for weather, if they cannot remember whether weather has an generalization. Second language speakers use a more general word rather than a more particular one, such as animal for rabbit, for example, shifting up from the basic level of vocabulary described in Chapter 3 to the subordinate. Description. Speakers cannot remember the word for kettle and so on describe it as the thing to cook water in. Exemplification or exemplification. Speakers give an example rather than the general term such as cars for transport. For example, shift down a level. Word coining, that is making up a word when speaker does not know it, such as inventing an imaginary French word "pierrot" for watch. Restructuring, the speaker has another attempt at the same sentence, as in the learner struggling to find the rare English word sibling. I have two, one sister and one brother. Avoidance strategies. These Fair and Crasper divide into formal avoidance and functional avoidance. Formal avoidance, the speaker avoids a particular linguistic form. Functional avoidance, the speaker avoids different types of function. The strategies exist to plug gaps in the learner's vocabulary by allowing them to refer to things for which they do not know the L2 words. A better name is then compensatory strategies. Second language learners are always having a compensate for the limited vocabulary at their disposal. Conceptual archi strategy, analytic strategy. In this, learner tries to break the meaning of the word up into parts and then convey the parts separately. So a student searching for the word parrot says, talk a bird, talking to parse bird that talks. Holistic strategy. Here, the learner thinks of the meaning of the word as a whole and tries to use a word that is the closest approximation. For example, seeking for the word desk, a student produces the table which captures all the salient features of desk apart from the fact it is specifically for writing at. Linguistic archi strategy, we have morphological creativity. One possibility is to make up a word using proper endings and hope that it works. For instance, trying to describe the act of ironing, the student came up with the word ionize. L1 transfer, the students also have a first language on top. It is possible for them to transfer a word from the first to the second language, hoping it is going to exist in the new language. In good language learner strategies, one interesting theme is the good language learner strategies. Try to see what good language learners had in common. They found 6 board strategies shared by GLLS. GLL Strategy 1. Find a learning style that suits you. Strategy 2. Involve yourself in the language learning process. Strategy 3. Develop an awareness of language both as system and as communication. Strategy 4. Pay constant attention to expanding your language knowledge. Strategy 5. Develop the second language as separate system. Strategy 6. Take into account the demands that second language learning imposes. Let's proceed to types of learning strategies. First is metacognitive strategies, which involve planning and thinking about learning, such as planning one's learning, monitoring one's own speech and writing, and evaluating how well one has done. Cognitive strategies involve conscious ways of tackling learning such as note-taking, resourcing, and elaboration. Social strategies mean learning by interacting with others such as working with fellow students or asking the teacher's help. We also have the direct and indirect strategies. Remember that learning strategies and language teaching exploit the GLL strategies that are useful to the students, develop the students' independence from the teacher with learner training or directed learning. Make students aware of the range of strategies they can adopt. Provide specific training in particular strategies. Remember the similarities and differences between learning in a second language and learning other school subjects. And our topics for this video has just ended. For more knowledge, you can read further by looking at these references. By the way, this is the reference for the topics we have just learned. This is Claudine Boccar saying, learning can be bore you sometimes, but can never make you stagnant. Great learning, fellas!